Over the years, we've seen the reputations of pretty much every Assassin's Creed game fluctuate all over the place, but none have had such ups and downs as Assassin's Creed Rogue, which since its release in 2014 has been labelled a lot of things. At its release, most seem to consider it a much better option to its next-gen counterpart Unity, mainly due to, well, you know. As time went on though, more and more people came to the conclusion that Rogue was a terrible misstep that simply didn't need to exist. Nowadays though, Rogue has been put on a pedestal time and time again as the most underrated Assassin's Creed game, or as Eurogamer put it, the best AC game you've never played. Being widely considered the lesser of Ubisoft's two 2014 ACs, this newfound reputation of Rogue somewhat makes sense. But the thing is, Rogue isn't a side game, it was never advertised as such, and its price tag certainly never gave that impression. So as a fully fledged main entry into the series, does it really deserve the recent praise it's gotten? Before we get into that, I would genuinely appreciate it if you could hit like, it really does help me out. Also, if you're new here and you end up enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe with post notifications on so you don't miss any more like it. And without further ado, let's get into Assassin's Creed Rogue. Based on the first scene of Rogue, it'd be easy to make the claim that it's underrated, with a fairly gorgeous long-spanning shot of the North Atlantic with Elitsa Alexandrova's score emanating in the background. I probably butchered her name there. But the conversation that follows doesn't really live up to that cinematic intro, as Ubisoft once again shows off their inability to introduce characters.
Minute, I nearly had you.
Nearly counts for nothing, Shay. And besides, no. That was just luck.
I make my own luck, Liam.
You've been saying that for years, but you're precious little to show for it.
Strange introductions aside,
It is Capitaine Louis-Joseph Gauthier, Chevalier de la Vérendrye.
we get an introduction that in some ways is brilliant for the franchise, and in others is an absolute disaster. This opening section introduces almost all of Rogue's significant gameplay features in about a 5-minute span, and considering most of them carry over directly from Black Flag, this stunted tutorial is a breath of fresh air compared to the bloated hour-long tutorials of past games. However, this tutorial sequence ends with the most underwhelming and disappointing title card drop in the entire series.
What course would you have me set, Shay?
Time to report back to the mentor. Wouldn't you agree?
Wise words, Captain. Wise words.
It's here that we suddenly get taken out of the Animus, as per the tradition of the series, to be led through the same offices of Black Flag's modern day. We're reintroduced to Melanie, as well as Violet da Costa and Otzoberg, before being sent off to do more IT work filled with mindless minigames that take longer to walk to than to actually complete. Rogue and Unity truly were the epitome of Ubisoft not caring about the series' modern day, and it's pretty easy for your mind to go completely blank through the various hacking moments throughout the story. So we swiftly return to the Animus, and with it, return to a location not seen since Assassin's Creed 3, the Davenport homestead. And after seeing Achilles and Adewale again, it's time to meet the underwhelming cast of characters Rogue presents. First, of course, we have Liam, the wise best friend whose entire personality is he's bald? Moving on. Then there's Kegasawase, the overzealous hard worker, Hope, the overly flirtatious love interest, and of course, Louis-Joseph Gaultier, Chevalier de la Vérendrye, the constantly furious sergeant figure. I did it. First try! It definitely wasn't first try, but still, I got his name. Every single one of the assassins is a walking stereotype, completely void of any actual motivation, and never given any time to have any type of depth built up. We see some early friction between Shay and his assassin brethren, but it's here we run into a bit of inconsistency. Despite being presented as a novice, a young, unskilled, undisciplined recruit, unworthy of even knowing the motives of his missions, Shay at the same time is consistently the most competent member of the Brotherhood, constantly being sent on missions most vital to the assassin's cause. It's a strange dichotomy, as the seeming distrust of many of the assassins towards Shay, along with Shay's feeling of being held down and restricted by the Creed, doesn't really match up to the actual content the player is experiencing, creating a bit of a divide between the player and the characters. Speaking of the actual content, it's here where the driving force of Rogue's entire story begins, the thread that holds the entire game together, the main motivation of literally every character you come across. You chase down a couple of Isu MacGuffins. Yeah. Essentially, the entire story of Rogue consists of Shay finding an artifact, then losing said artifact, then finding it again, then losing it again. It's a loop that holds throughout the entirety of its shallow and minuscule runtime, and after a while, the urgency that feels so present at the beginning of Shay's story begins to wear off. Another plot device used multiple times in the game comes with Shay's assassinations, beginning when he hunts down George Washington's brother. After assassinating Washington, which by the way is a mission seemingly far too important for an undisciplined novice, it's revealed that, shock horror, it was all just a ploy to give the Templars time to escape with the first Civ box. Not only is this a pretty lazy way to prolong the story, not only does this exact same twist get repeated again later on, but this excuse that someone was distracting Shay to let their allies get away happens 3 times throughout Rogue. In total, Rogue contains 9 assassinations. So yes, a third of the main story of Rogue is hunting down targets just for them to tell you it was a waste of time. For a game that's already short, this absolute padding probably seemed necessary, but I feel like there was surely a better way to fill out Shay's story without making him look like a complete idiot for falling for the same trick 3 separate times. After hunting down the next generic Templar to get the precursor box, and hunting down another to get the manuscript, Shay and Liam make their way to meet Benjamin Franklin, and Shay begrudges that he's little more than a messenger, again trying to bring about the sense that Shay feels unimportant to the Assassin Order, despite, you know, killing 3 major Templar targets, finding and capturing 2 massively important artifacts, and seemingly being the only assassin to actually do any work in the colonies. Once again, Shay's emotions are completely disconnected from the players, and his journey to defecting from the Brotherhood becomes even less impactful. Reaching Benjamin Franklin and subsequently doing a quick fetch quest, the precursor box secrets are revealed, a map not dissimilar to the one we see in Assassin's Creed 1, marked with a symbol in Lisbon. And luckily enough, Shay just so happens to have plenty of experience of the Portuguese city, and from one glance on a globe knows the exact location of the precursor temple that holds the Piece of Eden. Going to Portugal, we do get a pretty great callback to the Assassin Tombs of the Ezio trilogy. However, with the unprecise parkour system carried over from AC4, along with some massively simplistic level design, the Portuguese church takes only a couple of minutes to work your way through. I do have to say though, despite Rogue carrying over many of the faults that 3 and 4's parkour had, it does make some decent improvements. The system itself is essentially the exact same, but what really shines is the upgraded set pieces and world design of the North Atlantic and New York. Gone are large expanses of open land and minimal pathways, replaced with a sprawling interconnected world that gives the player countless ways to traverse. No matter where you are, whether it's a New York rooftop, a fort in the North Atlantic, or climbing through trees in River Valley, it always feels as if there's at least 3 different paths to get you to your destination. The inclusion of far more obstacles and options also means there's far less chance of you accidentally moving the analog stick an inch the wrong way and completely ruining the flow and momentum of your movement. The system's still fundamentally flawed, and doesn't provide the player freedom the likes of the Ezio trilogy did. However, it's definitely a more consistent system than Black Flag, and truly shows itself in the many set pieces Rogue holds. And the best of these set pieces just so happens to occur in the middle of Lisbon. After finding the Piece of Eden and accidentally setting off an earthquake, Shay leaps to action, sprinting out of the city in the midst of the chaos of it crumbling around him. The earthquake of course acts as a motivation for Shay, but deeper than that, it acts as a visual metaphor for the chaos so often linked to the assassins. The chaos that Haytham warned of in Assassin's Creed 3, the potential chaos that the Order represent. As much as the moment doesn't emotionally hit the player as much as Shay, as much as it comes across slightly hollow as his motivation, I do think fundamentally it was the right way to go in terms of an assassin turned Templar story. Its execution was a little subpar, but to truly make the story believable, they did have to visualize the potential dangers the assassin philosophy presents, instead of simply having a character explain it. The moral grey area between the assassins and Templars is a facet of the series I honestly think is let down by Rogue, but they definitely made an effort to make the player see the importance of balance, as opposed to just glorifying one order over the other. Well, they kinda made an effort. At the start at least. Yeah, it didn't last very long. Shay heads back to the homestead, furious with Achilles, completely disheartened and disgusted by the actions of those who claim to fight for humanity. And to be perfectly honest, they never really give him any reason to think otherwise, with Achilles simply disregarding Shay's anguish and Hope and Liam defending their mentor without a second thought. So understandably, Shay sets out to prevent
what happened in Haiti
from ever happening again, stealing the manuscript before being shot off a cliff. But to the shock of a Violet of all people, Shay survived. I still don't quite understand how they can have the memory data of Shay and not know that he survived, but anyway, that doesn't matter. Because it's here you meet the mysterious Otzoberg, who seems to be obsessed with plastic surgery considering he looks different every time we see him. Back into the Animus we go once again, and Shay's been taken to the care of an elderly couple in New York, who luckily enough get attacked by criminals 3 minutes after Shay wakes up from weeks of illness and rehab. Am I nitpicking? Yes. Do I care? No. Chasing down one of the criminals, Shay's led to a gang hideout where we finally see, the assassins, whose first tenet is hide in plain sight, are in control of a New York gang that wears bright yellow and fly a flag with the assassin insignia for all the city to see. What the fuck? When people say that the assassin order in this game is completely misrepresented, this is the main thing that comes to mind, with it completely going against the foundations of the creed. Oh, and just generally, the assassins probably shouldn't be allied with gangs of criminals. It just makes them look infinitely more corrupt than they already do in this game. It's really at this point where all moral ambiguity goes out the window, and the assassins and Templars essentially just switch sides, especially after we meet Colonel George Monroe, not only the embodiment of everything great about the Templars, but also, simply, the most righteous human of all time. The writers really went overboard here to make us sympathise with the Templars, with Monroe acting as a completely incorruptible force of good to mentor Shay, which, similarly to the assassins, makes him completely two-dimensional and uninteresting. Speaking of shallow characters, you also get to meet Christopher Gist here, whose entire personality is his comically ridiculous voice.
Good show, Shay. Ran them right out of their own den.
He does serve a minor purpose, however, introducing Shay and the player to the assassin gangs of New York, and most notably the new stalker enemy type, as finally we get to experience what it's like to be hunted by an assassin. Accompanied by the classic AC multiplayer whispers, the stalkers are meant to add a sense of fear to your journey throughout the world, and when one attacks you, it can genuinely take you by surprise. But in all reality, the minimal damage that they actually do when they assassinate you leaves you feeling more mildly annoyed than fearing for your life, and the constant whispers can get more than a bit annoying when you constantly hear them running across the rooftops of New York. Luckily enough, Shay's old ship just happens to be docked in the city, and after a quick recapturing, it's back to the wide seas, as from here on out, Shay essentially becomes a privateer for the British Navy, now at arms with the French in the 7-Year War. This at least provides a decent explanation for the shipboarding system, without any piracy involved, not to mention the new addition of other ships boarding you. The naval system is of course the same incredible system from Black Flag, simply copied and pasted. However, there are a fair few additions to the world that give some extra incentive to play it. Whether it be the prisoner of war ships or the all-out naval battles, the new side content surrounding the naval system takes an old mechanic and makes an entire new experience of it. This also leads to a difficulty curve which feels much more rushed and much less important, and a world that's far less interesting to explore in comparison to its pirate predecessor. To be honest, very little of the side content of Rogue feels at all important, and so much of it feels completely dismissible, mainly due to how it interweaves with the main story. Whilst the like of Black Flag's main story takes place over a span of years, with major time jumps in between for Edward to go explore the Caribbean, Rogue instead feels much more urgent, and with that it feels very easy to play Rogue completely linearly, ignoring the surprisingly massive open world. It also doesn't help that there aren't any actual side missions, with the side content instead consisting completely of the ever so hated Ubisoft collectible hunt. Whether it be Viking swords, Templar maps, or keys to unlock the underwhelming native armor, the game truly does turn into a complete collectathon if you have any intentions of 100%ing it. Whilst I understand that Ubisoft Sofia wouldn't have had the time and resources to craft unique individual side missions, the sheer volume of collectibles spread across the various maps of Rogue, which I can say is honestly far too big, just feels like a half-hearted way to stuff the game with enough content to justify its AAA price tag. After hunting down a forgettable assassin spy from earlier in the game, it's revealed that the assassin-led gangs in New York are creating new weapons with the help of Benjamin Franklin, namely chemical bioweapons. Yes, the assassins are embracing their inner war criminal and are developing mustard and tear gas to use in the middle of the second most populated city in the entire country. Yeah, that moral ambiguity really went straight out the window. Shay puts a stop to their plan in the most Michael Bay style possible before returning to Monroe to find himself greeted with a number of other men. Firstly, Jack Weeks, who exists, and William Johnson, who is a mind-numbingly boring character in his first game and hasn't gotten any better since. A couple of time jumps later, and Shay ends up in the North Atlantic, slap bang in the middle of the 7 Years' War, where, for some fucking reason, Kegasawase is leading French troops, with the assassins fully entrenched in war. Now of course, this completely goes against the Creed, and the fact that the assassins so constantly go against the philosophy of their own order in this game really takes away from the Templar fantasy it's trying to create. Rogue was advertised as a game where you take the shoes of a Templar fighting against the assassins, but in all reality, Shay ends up as little more than a privateer fighting against the French military. Their inclusion in the war, along with their flag-flying criminal empire, completely dissolves any earlier illusions of the game poking holes in the assassin philosophy, and instead of actually showing the negatives of it with any nuance, it simply morphs the assassins into a cult of battle-obsessed megalomaniacs who at no point show any signs of fighting for the people or even caring about human life. Diluting down the main narrative theme of your game to this extent really makes it hard to connect with Rogue, as it leaves the characters alone to carry the story, and considering, as I've said, nearly every character is a two-dimensional stereotype, it's not exactly promising. Now that I mentioned two-dimensional characters, it's now time for a two-dimensional character death, as it's at this point that Captain Monroe's time in Shay's life comes to an end, which would have been a pretty heartfelt scene if it wasn't completely predictable from the moment you meet the man. But no worries, because instead of his death leaving a lasting impact, Monroe's instantly replaced with a new Templar master, one that we all know too well, one that's widely considered one of the best characters in the series.
Then we welcome you into our fold, brother. You are now a Templar, harbinger of a new world. May the Father of Understanding guide us.
However, Haytham in Rogue is nowhere close to the same character we see in Assassin's Creed 3. Gone are his pessimistic ponderings of the world, gone is the wit and oozing charisma, and instead we get a muted version of Haytham, who despite still being one of the better characters in this game, is nowhere close to the same conflicted, nuanced, quick-witted man we've come to know. Moving on, the final few hours of Rogue are honestly very rushed, with not only the final 5 assassinations, but also the most pivotal battle of the 7 Years' War, all crammed into a mere 2 sequences that round out the game. Oh, and Adewale returns right at the end of the war to lead the French in the Battle of Louisbourg, which again just feels so out of character for the former slave and pirate. Haytham and Shay swiftly hunt Ade down, and we get an anticlimactic assassination for one of the more beloved characters in the series. And then, one mission later, without any issues or struggles, Shay and Haytham immediately track down Hope and Liam, who've gotten access to the box to find the next temple location. For some bizarre reason though, instead of just killing Shay where he lays, Hope decides to steal his gas mask and try to poison him, despite her hand literally being 2 inches from his neck. Is any actual reason ever given for this? No. She'd rather just go on a run around the city, because if Shay actually faces consequences and dies, well, you know, the rest of the game can't happen. After another anticlimactic kill, it's back to the ocean to find Le Verendrye, who is still the exact same raging caricature that he was 10 hours earlier. And unsurprisingly, his death provides nothing to the story besides yet another arbitrary obstacle on the Templars' chase. Not that it's made up for by any kind of interesting character moment though. Neither Shay nor Le Verendrye show any kind of growth since the last time they fought at the opening of the game. And if I could point to one scene that encapsulates the true nothingness that Rogue's plot actually provides, it'd be here, as comparing this final showdown to the intro really hammers home how little impact or effect this entire story has had on anyone involved, aside from Shay just not wearing a hood anymore. Keeping up the fast-paced MacGuffin chase, Haytham and Shay immediately head to the Arctic Circle, where despite being way behind Liam and Achilles, just so happen to show up at the exact moment Shay's former brothers find the piece of Eden. And at the last minute, with a complete lack of explanation, Achilles has a total change of heart and suddenly agrees wholeheartedly with what Shay told him all those years ago.
Shay was right.
What would he know? More than me, apparently.
Unfortunately though, this 5-second character arc doesn't quite redeem the absolute atrocities that the colonial assassins have committed. The only thing it does is completely justify Shay leaving the Brotherhood, once again draining all moral ambiguity from the game that was supposedly going to explore the grey area of the everlasting conflict between the orders. Of course though, you can't have an Assassin's Creed game where they all kiss and make up, so Liam decides to be a complete fucking imbecile and knock over the only thing that matters in the entire room. I will give give this final mission some credit where it's due, however, because it does provide some genuinely decent platforming and yet another great parkour set piece to try to make up for the complete lack of any narrative weight. Liam dies, anticlimactically, and we get a single line of dialogue which is supposed to make up for the complete lack of any kind of coherent thematic plot points.
I hope that world is a good one.
And this cheap quote is used purely as an excuse for Shay to convince Haytham to keep Achilles alive, to ensure the world they're creating is a good one. Not only is this the first time throughout the entire game that Shay shows any kind of mercy, but it's also completely out of character for Haytham to agree with him. And although we get an epic explanation of how Achilles has his limp, it's abundantly clear that this moment occurs purely to maintain the continuity of Assassin's Creed 3, as opposed to being the natural growth of any of the three characters. Continuing this obsession with tying up all loose ends, Haytham then decides to send Shay on a worldwide hunt to find the lost precursor box, to ensure he's written out of Assassin's Creed 3, but more importantly, to set up the death of Charles Dorian. Well, it would be important if it was ever followed up on after Assassin's Creed Unity, but unsurprisingly, it was never spoken of again. So, one final time, we're taken out of the Animus to traipse around Abstergo's offices, and it's this exact moment, to me, that started the pointlessness of AC Modern Days for years to follow. Because instead of finding some massively important temple or artifact, instead of actually continuing the narrative set up in Black Flag, instead of, anything worthwhile happening, your faceless first-person protagonist is sent to upload footage of Shay's memories to the assassin servers. Yes, the entire purpose of this whole journey was so that Otzoberg could cyberbully the assassin. The only reason he wanted to see Shay's memories was to send videos of dead assassins to William Miles as some kind of bizarre high school intimidation technique, like sending an unflattering photo of someone around school to make them cry. It may not be the most pointless ending to one of these games, that'd be Unity, but it's certainly the weirdest ending, and really tops off this game's list of abysmally cliched and bizarrely characterized cast. Assassin's Creed Rogue is by no means the worst game ever, it's by no means the worst Assassin's Creed game, and it's by no means a bad game. But it is not even close to being some kind of underrated gem, lost in the mix of an oversaturated series it's part of. Rogue was advertised as some kind of switch up from the norm, a twist on the classic Assassin-Templar conflict, but by the end of the game, any semblance of interesting themes that were built up are completely destroyed, replaced with a MacGuffin chase in the midst of a war that makes the two orders feel very secondary. Worse than that though, it was advertised as a main game in the series, fully worth a $60 price tag, and regardless of the size of the map or the number of collectibles it contains, or the fact that it copy and pasted the gameplay of Black Flag, it simply doesn't justify itself as a fully fledged Assassin's Creed game. If Rogue was given the luxury of being a side game, it'd be an incredible addition to the series, but the fact of the matter is, it simply doesn't stack up as a main entry. Everything it does well is done better in AC4, and everything else it tries to do falls flat on its face. Yes, of course, Ubisoft Sofia may have not been given the sufficient time and resources to fulfill this game's potential, but that doesn't excuse the fact that Assassin's Creed Rogue is a painfully average and forgettable game that simply does not deserve the label of underrated. But hey, that's just my opinion. If you disagree, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Do you like Rogue? Do you hate Rogue? Are you indifferent? Let me know. Also, if you did enjoy the video, like I said at the start, it would really be appreciated if you could hit like. And if you're new here and you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe with post notifications turned on so you don't miss another video. With all that being said, I've been Joe, aka Founded Scarab, and I will see you in the next one.